She is an alderwoman of the Fourth Ward. And so, Ms. King, could you come and just greet us and say a few words?
My office is right next door, across the alley here, and I saw a good friend of mine just happened to be walking in the neighborhood. You are in the Fourth Ward. For those of you who don't know, my name is Sophia King. I'm alderman of the Fourth Ward. Alderwoman scares me because I think they may start paying me less. So I'm fine with alderman, but the Fourth Ward goes from Hyde Park, 53rd on the south, all the way to Jackson, so a part of downtown. All of the lakefront from 49th Street to Balboa. I'd like to say our western border is about King Drive here and Wells Street in the South Loop in downtown. So have a long ward, very diverse economically, politically, racially. I like to think of it, it really is a great ward, and it is a microcosm of the city. But I'm happy to that my good friend John Rogers is here. We go back more years than I'd like to say, because I'd like to think that I look a little younger than my years would suggest. But John Rogers is a testament of what somebody who comes from the community, who does well and gives back to the community, should look and breathe and be like. He really talks the talk and walks the walk. He's very concerned about our community, but not only that, he actually is doing things in our community. My husband and him actually go back from high school and even grade school, I believe. So, I've known of him, but I had the opportunity to help him with Ariel Community Academy when he started that. As soon as he was able to start giving back, meaning, made a little more than what it cost to sustain his own family and self, he started giving back to the community. And he's been doing that ever since. And I'm a personal testament to that because I've seen it over the years. He's also in a room when nobody is looking. He's always advocating on behalf of the community. And that really is a true test of leadership. When no one is looking, how you act and how you perform and what your message is. And so I am honored to just have run into John and know the importance of this program and to say some kind words, which are really easy to do when it comes to Mr. John Rogers. So you guys enjoy him. I'm going to leave you, but appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, first of all, I just want to say welcome to the Black Star Project. This is the Black Star Project's Public Policy and Economic Empowerment Luncheon Series. This is the 6th installment. Many of you, as I look around the room, many of you are friends and family of the Black Star Project. You guys know that the work that has been done through the Black Star Project for over 20 years now, and most of that work has centered around education and mentorship. Some of you may be aware that as of the turn of this year, at the beginning of 2018, behind the leadership of Philip Jackson, we shifted our focus into economics and finances, believing that will give more of our young people a greater chance to reach their full potential. We're very proud of the work that we did in the education arena through our mentor programs, but we just felt like it was the difference between helping a few kids squeeze through the system and trying to overhaul the system. And so we've decided to go that route, and so we've organized these luncheons and brought many different guest speakers in. We've talked about entrepreneurship, and we've talked about health as well, because it's a critical aspect of it. We can't do anything for anyone or any community if we aren't healthy enough to do so. So we've had those things as well. Today we have another very dynamic speaker with a list of accolades too long to list, but we are very, very thrilled to have you with us, Mr. Rogers. We really appreciate your time this afternoon, I should say. Before we get started with the program, I want to bring up our executive director, Ms. Gloria Smith.
Thank you, Herb, and thank you for being with us, Mr. Rogers. Philip is not here. Some of you know that he's going through some health challenges. He is currently in the hospital. He's at Lutheran General Hospital in Park Ridge. I spoke to him this morning. He sounds good. So I'm very encouraged that he won't be in the hospital long. But you're probably missing his newsletter that's sent out every morning. So as soon as he's up to it, I'm sure he'll be sending them out again soon. Normally, Philip does this portion of the program. He acknowledges some of the folks in the room, and so I'm going to try to do him proud by just, because he knows all of you, he knows who you are, and so, but I'm just going to call off a few names to recognize this morning. Bernard Clay, Bernard, Introspect Youth Services. William Towns is, I believe, on his way here with Benefit Chicago, but Christina Cordova is here. Herrera, Christina, thank you. He would recognize his mama, Dr. Grace Dawson, Mama Grace. Thank you. Kristen Faust from Neighborhood Housing is with us today. And then I have a whole list of names, folks who are here with Dr. Michael Foreman. Dr. Foreman is on our advisory board, and I just want to welcome all of you here. And this is Dr. Foreman and his wife, Lisa. Joyce Johnson is here. Joyce is one of my guests, so I just want to thank her for being here. And okay. Allison Kennard is a cousin who's here. Thank you, Allison. Just a few more. Mr. Monroe. I think everyone in the room knows Mr. Monroe and the Monroe Foundation, so we thank you for being here and big supporter of Black Star. And Vanessa, you too. Thank you. Thank you both. Just a few more. Ayana Orr, who is Mr. Rogers' assistant. Yes. Let's see. Miss Jackie Taylor, where are you? Woohoo! Black Ensemble. Kelly Fair is in the room. Kelly, where are you? And Carl West. Where's Carl? Woohoo! And I see you all. Everyone in this room is important. Deacon Price, and I'm not going to name names. I will come back and say a few words later. But, well, thank you all for being here. And on behalf of Philip, the Black Star Project, and my family, I thank you. And when I come back, I'm going to introduce the wonderful staff who helped put this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gloria. That was very difficult for Gloria. Gloria would much rather go around the room and name each of you all individually and do about a half an hour of welcomes. So we appreciate you.
And your mama's name.
So at this time, we will continue with the program. As I say, we want to try to get you guys out of here by about 1:30 or so if we can. There will be time for Q&A after. So once Mr. Rogers is done with his presentation, you guys are more than welcome. We'll begin a quick Q&A, and we will get started. I hope that you all left me some food over there. No? Vic? No? Right? I'll take whatever's left. It's all right. But no, seriously, welcome. We really appreciate each and every one of you being here. We do not take it lightly. We really, really appreciate your time and your presence. If you will, please help me in welcoming Mr. John Rogers.
Thank you so much. Really a privilege to be here. I really wish Philip well. I've known him for couple of decades, and so I know all the great work he's been doing in the community and all the various leadership roles he's had. So I really am very honored that he would ask me to come out and talk about what we can do to create more wealth in our communities. And we know it's a challenge. I think all of you know it's a challenge. So what I thought I would do today is just give some examples of things that we all know, but just to orient us, and then talk about what we can do to try to create more wealth in our community, and again, have some solutions hopefully, and then open it up for dialogue and discussion, because I know you guys have got lots of ideas. I know there are a lot of entrepreneurs here. I grew up not far from here. My father lived in Prairie Shores, just a few blocks down, right next to Michael Reese. And I started at age 16. I was a vendor at White Sox Park selling Cokes and beer and peanuts and popcorn. So it's always fun to come back, to this community. It's been such an important part of my life. So, one of the things I always start to talk about today when it comes to wealth is that just the basic data. And just my favorite recent point is that the Federal Reserve Board of St. Louis had data that talked about between 1991 and 2013, college-educated African Americans saw their wealth decline 55%, while college-educated whites saw their wealth increase 86%. That's pretty extraordinary, because there's this myth out there that things have been getting better and better and better for us, but in reality, it's gotten much, much, much worse. And for whatever reason, society doesn't want to recognize that, but I think it's important to recognize the fact that we've been going backwards, because then that hopefully energizes us to all work harder to try to find solutions. When you think about it, it's I'm honored to be here with these great portraits of these leaders in the back, because that's often what I talk about. Chicago was this mecca for African American businesses. When my father started buying stocks for me at age 12 instead of toys, he would take me to Independence Bank and Seaway Bank to get my checking account and my savings account. He took me to Illinois Service Federal. He made sure that I had a chance to meet the great African American entrepreneurs of that day that became my role models. And he thought it was very important that I worked with African American professionals in African American institutions. My first stockbroker on LaSalle Street was a man named Stacy Adams, who was the first black stockbroker. Some people might remember him on LaSalle Street. And he was kind of my role model and my inspiration. And unfortunately, as we know, we pretty much have lost all these great businesses. They've either been sold, they've closed. We lost the Johnson Publishing building, which was sort of the iconic building that all of us looked up to, and all the great work that John Johnson had done. When I was growing up on the South Side, I would go and see George Johnson's great factory on the South Side of Johnson Products, all the work that he did with Afro Sheen and Ultra Sheen. And then people don't remember, George Johnson created Independence Bank that became the largest black bank. And he worked with Burrell Advertising that became the largest black advertising agency. And he started Soul Train with Don Cornelius. A lot of people don't know that. And then, of course, he was so community-minded. He would buy 70 tables to the Urban League's Golden Fellowship dinner every year, he and his suppliers. And when Dr. King came to Chicago desperate to make payroll, George Johnson was there to bring all the other African-American entrepreneurs together, make sure the Independence Bank made the vital loans to SCLC, began to help them make payroll. And Dr. King was extraordinarily inspired by what the black business leadership could do here in Chicago. But again, now you look to where we are today, and then pretty much they're all gone. There are no large African-American companies that have 500 employees like Johnson Publishing did or Johnson Products. There's always an exception somewhere, but not the kind of really great jobs that were there in that life. And again, all the businesses that they supported and thrived, and all the entrepreneurs that they supported and helped to thrive. You look at I tell people all the time, not only do you see a lack of the African-American entrepreneurs doing well, but I remember, talking to other leaders a few years ago about this. Well, maybe people are now, if they're not, building great African-American businesses, maybe they're succeeding at majority companies downtown. Maybe that's the alternative. But, that's not the reality. The Tribune lists every Sunday the top 100 companies in Chicago. There's one CEO out of those top 100 companies that's African-American, Lisa Wardell at Adtalem, the old DeVry, 1 out of 100. Cranes used to list the top 25 of all the different industry sectors that we are in. Cranes would list the top 25 accounting firms, top 25 law firms, top 25 architecture firms, insurance firms, everything you can think about. We would be 0 for top 25, of these large companies. And then when you look to see again, if the large black companies aren't being successful, we're not making the top 25 law firm, top 25 banks. Again, maybe we're working at those places. But if you think about it today, the major private equity firms in town, you know, the Madison Dearborns, the GTCRs where Governor Rauner worked, these giant firms creating people who are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, most of them have never had an African-American professional, let alone an African-American partner. You know, if you were to put together all of the top audit firms, private equity firms, venture capital firms, hedge fund firms, investment banks, all put together, you're probably going to have less than 20 African-American partners in the whole city of Chicago. You know, the probability of you, if you're a high school student, becoming a professional athlete versus being a partner in one of these lucrative fields is much higher that you're going to become a professional athlete leaving a public high school today in Chicago than becoming a partner in one of these major businesses. You know, that's just the reality of it. We're not being included in the parts of the economy today where the wealth's being created. In financial services, in Silicon Valley, in the technology world, it's just fascinating. The two most lucrative parts of the economy are where you see the least amount of African-American success. And so that's the kind of the reality that we're dealing with. And so I always say, what do you have to do to, how has this happened? Why has this changed? I think a lot of it has to do with the broken promises of our anchor institutions here in our local community. As we know, all the major corporations, all the major hospitals, all the major museums and universities, foundations say they have a commitment to work with black business, you know, supplier development. But when you really look behind the scenes, that means if you're in certain fields, they're willing to work with you. And that's great. You know, we want to have more minority construction firms. We want to have more minority caterers. That's important. But we also want these institutions to work with us in all aspects of the economy, on all the dollars that they spend. And so most of the time, these anchor institutions have these broad commitments to work with black firms, but in reality, it's all a big mirage. They're not doing it. The opportunities, the wealth-building opportunities continue to go to the same white men, passing along opportunity from generation to generation to generation based upon long-term relationships. And we're not allowed to break through. And so when I look here in the city, just looking right out, you know, you look out the window here, IIT, you know, Columbia College, Roosevelt, Loyola, refuse to work with black businesses. The major foundations, MacArthur, Joyce Foundation, refuse to work with black businesses. Again, outside of a few unique one-offs. And it's just not right. And they all claim they care. They all say they want to have more diversity and inclusion, but they don't do it. And again, I go back and forth between minority-owned businesses and minorities being successful in majority institutions, because we know if you're the CEO of a big company, if you're a Frank Clark at Commonwealth Edison when he was the CEO there, you can make a big impact. When Don Thompson was the CEO of McDonald's, he could make a huge impact. We need to have that kind of leadership, but we're also not getting, you know, that type of leadership. So, you know, you ask, you know, kind of again, how does this happen? You know, in the old days, people fought for us. And we had, you know, Harold Washington here, we had Maynard Jackson in Atlanta. They always insisted that all the anchor institutions in their communities work with minority-owned businesses. And they all insisted that the major law firms or accounting firms or investment banks that were underwriting bonds and doing work for the city all had black partners and black professionals. And that was often the door openers that opened up doors for people like Jim Reynolds and others who've had success in business because they were given those opportunities. But we're not insisting that those anchor institutions either work with a minority business or insist that their majority companies have minority partners and minority leaders. World Business Chicago here in town has been working on this. They have their anchor institution initiative, but we got to get many more anchors in there and many more anchors doing the heavy lifting of really giving all of us the opportunities that we deserve to give. So what we've been doing at Ariel to try to do our part, a couple things. It was mentioned earlier, we started the Ariel Community Academy 21 years ago. It has 500 African American students there. We're teaching them about the stock market, trying to replicate what my father did for me, giving me real stocks to invest at age 12. Well, there what we have is that, and Ayana oversees the relationship with the Ariel Community Academy. Every first grade class gets a $20,000 class gift that we manage for the first 6 years through our mutual fund family. And then in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we turn the dollars over to the students to pick real stocks and to work with our analysts downtown, for us to go down to the school, at 46th and Greenwood, and talk to them about how do you do research on companies? How do you think about investing for the long term? Really giving them all the nuts and bolts so they can be prepared when they get off to college to save for college effectively, be able to save for their financial futures when they graduate from college. The second thing we're trying to do there is be a role model so these young people think about careers in financial services. And we think that's so important. So if you have downtown firms partnering with urban public schools like we are at the Ariel Community Academy, hopefully more people get engaged and involved and think about career paths. We have 2 graduates of the Ariel Community Academy now work full-time at our company. And we're really, really proud of that and hope to have more. We've had lots and lots of summer internships, and we think that's a really important thing. And the final part of the program, when the kids graduate in 8th grade, the $20,000, let's say the $20,000 has grown to $40,000, which is kind of like the typical thing that happens. They take $20,000 and give it to the next first grade class, so it becomes a self-perpetuating program. Then they take a portion of the profits that are left over and create a philanthropic gift for the school, something the school might need, a new sound system for the gym, new computers for the investment class, whatever it happens to be. And then finally what's left over is divided among the students, and if the students agree to put it into a 529 program to save for college, we match it with $500. And we think we're teaching the kids about matching, so they'll be prepared for that first 401k plan when they get into the workforce. And we think also the kids are learning about entrepreneurship. As they're learning to invest in public companies, we're also teaching them about what it's like to build a minority-owned business here in Chicago. And hopefully a lot of the kids leave better prepared to think about entrepreneurship as a career also. So that's one thing we do. The second thing we do, which fits with this, we think that a lot more of us are serving in leadership roles. And I know a lot of you guys here are on boards of nonprofits, on boards of corporations, on boards of civil rights organizations, and I have the opinion that we have to fight for us once we're in the boardroom. So 16 years ago, we started a conference called the Black Corporate Directors Conference with Charles Tribbett, who's a partner at Russell Reynolds and used to be the chairman of the Chicago Urban League. And we started with 30 directors at the Gleacher Center downtown Chicago. And now this last year we had 160 directors in Laguna Beach for the weekend. And the idea is to teach African Americans that are on corporate boards, one, learn from each other how we can be leaders in the boardroom, how we can make a difference in the boardroom, but most importantly, how can we fight for the civil rights agenda once we're there? The hypothesis of the conference the whole 16 years is that when you're the only person in the boardroom, often you get quiet and shy. You get uncomfortable asking the tough questions, bringing up race the way that, again, Harold and Maynard did, the way Dr. King did. And so the idea is that we learn from each other how to do that, and every year we have a conscience of the conference to come and speak. It can be someone like Andy Young, someone like Reverend Jackson, Harry Belafonte, John Lewis, people who actually marched with Dr. King, who are actually there. And some of the next generation of leaders have also come to be the conscience of the conference to remind us that if we don't speak up and fight for each other, who will? And then we agree at the conference that we're going to measure how well we're fighting, measure how diverse the workforces are and the corporate boards that we're on, the spend by category, so that people are understanding that we want to make sure that they're spending money in everything that we do and including us in everything that we do. So that's something that's important. And then finally, measuring the philanthropy to make sure the philanthropy from corporations isn't just going to the symphony or the opera, but are going to the issues that we all care about here in this room. So it's been really a great success. Every year we get CEOs to come from all walks of life. We've had everyone. We mentioned Don Thompson earlier, but Ken Chenault and Ursula Burns, Jamie Dimon and Jeff Immelt, some of the biggest corporate CEOs in the world. Last year we had Howard Schultz from Starbucks. We had Kevin Plank from Under Armour, and we had Shonda Rhimes and Kerry Washington, from the Scandal franchise. And that was my favorite part. And then finally, every year we have surprise entertainment. Last year was Boys to Men, but we've had Diana Ross and Smokey Robinson, The Temptations, and we try to bring it together. And hopefully we're making a difference, because if you think about it, those of us that have been privileged to serve on corporate boards, like I'm on the board of McDonald's and Exelon, the University of Chicago, the New York Times, those of us on the board, we're also going to be on the boards of all the other types of institutions in our local communities. And if we can all be on message around these things, we can all make a difference for all of us. And then the final thing we've done at Ariel, our newest project, and then I'll open up for questions, is that we created a internship program at the University of Chicago for minority students to work as summer interns in the investment offices of major endowments in the United States. So last year we had 10 students in endowments everywhere from the Knight Foundation in Miami to the Kresge Foundation in Michigan to the just University of Chicago's endowment. This year we'll have 20 students. Next year we'll have 40 students. And we think that's the best way for us to get exposed to the financial services industry, is to work within an endowment office, because those assets are being invested in all the different asset classes, from hedge funds to private equity. So I always ask people two questions. Why? A lot of times people, I was in Omaha a couple weeks ago for the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting, and I met with about 20 African American women who are all about wealth building for the black community. And of course they were thinking about it through the Warren Buffett lens of like what stocks to buy, how to think about the stock market, how to think about being a long-term versus a short-term trader, and all those things that are important, how to save effectively. But I said the best way you can build wealth for your community, our community, is to get people exposed and involved and engaged in the parts of the economy where the wealth's really being built today. So I started with that, and I want to sort of finish with that. And I always tell people, ask people two questions. During the financial crisis, there was a guy named John Paulson who made more money than any hedge fund manager in the country that year. In 1 year, anybody want to guess how much John Paulson, the most successful hedge fund manager, made in 1 year? Some of you might know. 200 million. 200 million?
10 billion. 20 billion.
He made, in 1 year, he made $5 billion. Wow. So he made $100 million a week. Now, these are the kind of folks who are fighting the fight for 15, that SEIU has. And he's making $100 million a week. It's kind of unbelievable when you think about it. And he's giving away money to the, Harvard University. He's giving a lot of money to the Central Park in New York. But it's because that's where his initiatives are. It's not thinking about our community. So that's one. The second question I asked, the largest private equity firm in the country, or one of them, is a firm called Blackstone, run by a guy named Steve Schwartzman. He's worth $12.8 billion according to Forbes. And he makes $800 million a year. How many employees do you think Blackstone has? 20? 1,000? Yeah. It's 600,000 employees. Yeah. It's because these large private equity firms control all these companies. When Bruce Rauner ran for governor, he said he had invested in 400 companies running GTCR. So the reason I bring that up, the amount of jobs that these financial services companies control, the amount of philanthropy they control, the political power they now have, and this enormous wealth that they have, they're not including us. And so we have to fight together to stop that from happening. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I really appreciate your patience today. Thank you.
You guys just raise your hand. I'll keep you guys in order to ask questions, but I do ask that you make sure that we actually have a question, right? So let's not take the time to give our own autobiography or anything like that. Just make sure we actually had a question, and that we aren't here to attack Mr. Rogers' lab. Who was here last time when the guy had anyway? You, sir, and then you in the back. Mr. Monroe, you're first.
Okay, Mr. Rogers, good afternoon. I support your challenge to philanthropy in particular. I will remind all of us that 3 years ago, Black Star Project put out an exhaustive study as to where philanthropy in Chicago was not putting their dollars and where it was going, academia, the arts. And it shook the very foundation of the MacArthur Foundation. And the response of philanthropy in Chicago was the grant program, Safe and Peaceful Community. But here's the problem, and here's the opportunity, Mr. Rogers. I'm president of a small family foundation. I would love to work with you on challenging broader philanthropy in Chicago, because we try to have some dialogue with philanthropy, and in some of the civil rights organizations, like the Urban League, to which many of us feel the Urban League has long abdicated its role as a civil rights organization. Because you can't be an iconic civil rights organization, have all the major bank market presidents on your board, and conditions remain the same economically in the black community. So I would love to work with you in bringing the foundation community together, because we tried this, but the response is, I'm just a little peon to them. So they'll go to the Sherry Runners of the world and ask, should we really be doing this? And the feel is, you're doing just fine. Just continue to make your annual gift to us. So we had got more philanthropy to look beyond the regular majority-owned banks, acting as trustee banks for them, had invested in Seaway Bank, invested in North Service Federal, and some of the independents in Drexel. They may still be with us today.
I completely agree with everything you said. It's interesting. I've been on the Urban League board for 37 years. It's crazy. I was chairman of the board, and I admit it took me about 20 of the years of the 37 before I started asking in the governance committee meetings and the nominating committee meetings, why are we putting these people on who work for these banks, insurance companies, these Walgreens of the world, and all these giant anchors in town, who have shown no history of working with our community, no history of supporting our local financial institutions or our Ebonies or our WVONs, you know. I'm not sure how they do it, Jackie, in an ensemble, but a lot of them have not lived up to what they've promised us to do. And then we put people on the board who work at those institutions and give them cover to continue to exclude us, honor them and give them awards at dinners and galas and things like that for all their great success when they're not doing it. And then we'll find they'll put somebody on the board who's black who's never shown any inclination of fighting for black people in their leadership roles at those institutions. So I started asking those questions. It made people very uncomfortable. But I think it's an extraordinarily important question for all of us to ask. I've talked to Reverend Jackson about this. Of course, he gets it. It's not putting more of us on these boards. It's putting those of us in leadership roles who are going to fight for us once we're there. And that's critical. I think the second thing you brought up, I've talked to Philip about this, that it's great that you're pushing these foundations and that he's pushing the foundations, but I've also told him that MacArthur Foundation and Joyce Foundation still refuses to work with any black money management firms. They hire dozens and dozens and dozens of firms, and it's like baseball in 1940. There are no black people good enough or qualified to play. And I said, that's morally wrong. Now, there's a few guys who are doing it well. The McCormick Foundation started to do some things. Chicago Community Trust is doing some things. The Field Foundation, where Lyle Logan's on the board, are doing some things. So there's some good ones. But the biggest in town says nobody's good enough. And it's just like, it's interesting, all these universities in town outside of the University of Chicago has said basically the same thing. So I think this idea that Philip had to push these foundations to do the right things, but the bottom line is if we can start to do business for them, to be their lawyer, to be their money managers or whatever, then we can create our own foundations like you have and be the role models in our own community, not having to go to the white institution always begging for the support.
Right.
We want to be like George Johnson and John Johnson and be able to have that kind of wealth that we can then support our own communities, again, and be our own role models. And that's why what's happened with MacArthur is just so disgusting that they won't allow us to play. So.
Sir in the back.
Yes, I was going to ask, how can the wealth in the community that's accumulated be utilized to break this generational cycle of violence in the city? I mean, we're talking about wealth, and how can it be used to galvanize people and break this generational cycle of violence? I'm a school teacher, so that's why.
I'm not this is, I know you have speakers all the time. I'm not the best speaker on this, except to say that I think what strong minority businesses can do are, three things. One, we've started a small public school for 500 students that's been there 20 years. Hopefully that's helping to create a more safe environment and opportunity and aspiration for those students. Arnie Duncan worked at Ariel for 6 years before he went off to be school superintendent of the city of Chicago, and then became, cabinet member for President Obama. Now he's come back and has created a program, called CRED, to work with these young men. I just was texting with one of his top lieutenants who's been shot 6 times. He works for Arnie in the program where now they're creating career paths for these young men. And so I tell people I'm just following what George Johnson used to do when he had Bill Berry working at the firm and other leaders like that were very engaged in the community. That's what we were doing when we work with someone like Arnie or Ayanna, where they're working in the community, and then they come back and they're fighting for our community, creating programs like CRED and other anti-violence things. But I think at the end of the day, we need jobs and wealth in our community. So all the work you guys are doing here, that's what we're all here to do, is talk about wealth. If we have wealth, we'll provide jobs. We'll do what John Johnson or George Johnson did, and not only provide jobs for each other, but then invest in each other's businesses. If you've got a cousin or a friend or somebody who's looking for capital to start their business, you're there for them because you're a successful business. If someone's needs a new customer like Burrell Advertising did or Essence did, well, there's George Johnson to advertise and use a black ad agency. My mom's law firm was coming along. George Johnson was doing legal work with her so that she could then pay for me to go to high school. So we need that kind of successful entrepreneurship that will, I think, help a lot with the violence issues. But I know there are a lot more experts on that than I am.
The gentleman right next to him was next in here.
Hi, how you doing? I just had a question about, it's kind of to switch gears a little bit. I want to embark on my own finance journey to become a financial analyst as well. I want to know how you got started, or how you would tell, I also work with high school students. So, for example, I know you want an influx of students or influx of African Americans to be a part of this financial journey. What would you tell the average West Side or South Side Chicago student how they should get started on their financial journey?
Well, I think you take as many math courses as you can, and then when you get to college, you major in finance or economics or accounting. You get the basics. I think are critical. Summer jobs are critical. You shouldn't follow my path and be a vendor at the ballpark. My mom was very unhappy with that, but I loved it. But I think that what I tell young people all the time now is that those internships are actually important from a serious side, and almost every college has an endowment. And so I tell young people of color, volunteer maybe during the school year to work in the endowment office, convince them to hire you as a summer intern in the endowment office. Then maybe you're prepared to have a full-time job. I just heard this story the other day. I'm not sure it's true. I know it used to be true, that one of the guys who works for Harvard endowment made $28 million last year working for Harvard. I knew in the past they used to have executives who made $25 million a year working for the endowment. From my understanding, in the country's history, there are less than 10 African Americans that have worked as the chief investment officer of a major endowment in this country. So I tell our young people, force them to hire us on campus in these endowment offices, because that's a lucrative career in and of itself. But then, as I said earlier, once you're in that endowment office, you'll learn about every aspect of all the financial services sectors that there are. And all these billionaires will be coming into your endowment office to sell their services. And so you'll get to meet some of these guys who say they care about diversity, and then you can call them on it and say, I want to work for you next summer. So that's my suggestion.
You mentioned the educational aspect with the investment club you have with the grade schoolers.
Yeah.
And then how some of the business leaders are donating to their causes, like the opera, or like the one who donated to Harvard University. And pertaining to the higher education as it would relate to someone who wants to be an entrepreneur or to work in financial services or wealth management or what have you, like you said, it's going to take that higher level degree. But college tuition now has so outpaced inflation.
Right,
You can't graduate from college without having debt ladder that you're going to have to spend years to pay off. So, what are your comments on that obstacle? As it affects African Americans and what solutions there are to that.
Well, all I can say is, I mean, during the Obama administration, I chaired his, I can never remember the name of the exact thing I chaired. Ayanna?
The Council for Financial Capability for Young Americans.
Everyone got that? And a huge part of it, it was interesting, it was a cool thing to chair because they had the CEOs of major companies around the country, from Citibank to big insurance companies, were all on the board. The Treasury Secretary was on the council that I chaired, the Education Secretary, Arnie, and there was a huge initiative within the Treasury Department and within our council around the fact there was too much debt for college students. And I know that was a big, big goal of President Obama's and Secretary Duncan to figure out a way to mitigate that. And there's a whole kind of plethora of things that you're probably more aware of than I am that were implemented during the Obama administration to make college more accessible for folks from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And I'm worried that the new head of education, the head of education department, doesn't have that same dream. That Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump don't have the same goals as Arnie and President Obama.
You know, it says the universities have these huge endowments. I went to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
They have these huge endowments,
Right.
but the tuition's $50,000 a year.
Right.
They're putting them all into buildings. They're putting them all into these other
Yeah.
things that their donors, donated for. But you know, I think it's.
Right, the idea that there are endowments that are very huge and they're keeping the money for perpetuity and not spending it on the needs of today, is a challenge in a lot of places. It's interesting. I was just talking to a senator today, a United States senator, about the fact that, there's the tax recently in the tax reform bill. There was a move to tax heavy endowments for some of the reasons you're talking about. That they have all this money, it's going untaxed. People are giving the money and getting tax deductions for it. And so what some of us have been doing, Congressman Meeks and Congressman Waters and myself and some others, are focusing on, say, if you're going to get these tax deductions and you're running a university endowment, you need to at least include some people of color in things that you do. Hire some at your organization, work with minority-owned firms, and push your majority firms to be diverse. I don't know if this data that there's an Ivy League school that I'm sure the data is very similar to Notre Dame. They have they kept track of the demographics of all of last year. Of all the money management firms that manage money for this endowment, there were 260 professionals that make over $1 million a year. One African American and one Latino. So out of 260. So to your point, those 258 other people have a lot more money to send their kids to college. They're making $1 million a year. Again, there's one black person, one Latino who's making $1 million or more. So part of the answer is we got to force these white institutions to include us and include people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to have an opportunity to create wealth, because, as you know, a lot of those people, those 260, are people who've inherited those opportunities. They grew up in Lake Forest, they went to New Trier, and their friend is head of the endowment somewhere and hires their firm to manage it, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're left out of that because of the segregation that we have in this society and all the remnants of the discrimination that we faced in this country for the last several hundred years. So it's a challenge.
You, then you, and then you, sir.
Great. So, John, 2 questions. Number 1, on entrepreneurship, what are your thoughts or mindset of people starting out their own business, brick and mortar business versus non-brick and mortar? For example, maybe internet business. What are your thoughts on that? And then the second question has to do with financial literacy. It's pretty much void within our school systems. So then when individuals and they go to college and they come out with $100,000 in debt,
Right.
They don't know how to use strategies to quickly eliminate that debt. They hear about refinancing, but they don't hear about, say, for example, genuine self-direction, where you can control your own retirement plan and invest in that. Or just basic information, understanding components of what impacts your credit score, how you can start off with whole life insurance and build on that. Basic financial literacy concepts. So I'm curious as to your thoughts on that in terms of financial education and what we can do to tackle that issue.
Yeah, well, I can remember that. I won't remember the first question, but the second one, that's what we're obviously trying to do with our Ariel Community Academy. And one of I didn't say earlier, the conclusion we gave President Obama after the 6 years that I chaired his council was that financial services institutions in this country should partner with urban public schools in a systemic way. So every public school in the city should have a relationship with one of the many, many financial institutions that are here, that are downtown in our communities, where not only are we helping to teach the financial literacy curriculum, helping to prepare kids for making sure they don't end up with too much debt and making the right choices with their mortgage and all the rest of the things they need to do to be financially secure, be effective in their 401k plan, but then again, be role models so that people start to think about careers where the wealth is being created today, which I've talked a lot about. So I think that these financial institutions that will give, they're so proud of the fact they've written money to this charter school, or they've helped that school, or they helped this scholarship program. They need to roll up their sleeves and be engaged and involved in the schools. And the school kids should be like they do with us, come down to the downtown offices, and a lot of them, as you know, have never been up in an elevator at the Aon Center. And it's exciting for them, and they start to see what it's like to dream about a job there. So that's my job. My idea is we got to get these financial institutions to partner with urban public schools. And then finally, quickly on your entrepreneurship, as I've been saying, I think it's financial services or technology. It's less and less bricks and mortar. The economy has changed. 100 years ago, if you look at the Forbes list of the largest companies, they were all big industrial manufacturing companies, mining companies, oil companies, big industrials. Now the biggest companies are Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Google, Apple. It's technology and financial services. And we're still playing the game with the supplier diversity. Okay, we'll let the black people again do the supply stuff, and the white guys will do all the stuff where people are getting really rich and powerful.
Thank you.
Next question.
Mr. Rogers, I haven't had the honor to be a friend of yours like Sophia for all these years, but I had admired you, and I have been one of the greatest admirers of you and the things you've done. I know when you started Ariel and the stuff that you guys did over there at the old Shakespeare School.
Oh, thank you.
I'm asking you, I'm the president of the DuSable Alumni Coalition for Action, and we are getting ready to start a new high school. We had the gate stuff with the small schools that were unsuccessful. We're going to start, we're working with the Board of Education and ComEd and some of the other energy companies to start an advanced technology school. Sitting here listening to you and having lived under my neighbor who was in finances from Bermuda and all of his children making $200,000 to $300,000 a year working in finance, you have answered my question about what to do for the new DuSable. But I need your help. We have said the focus would be on advanced technology. Sitting here today, I know that we need to do advanced technology and finance. We talked about what should we do with the children. I need you to help us bring a high school into the city of Chicago that will focus our children from freshmen to seniors on finance, so that when they get out, they will be able to deal with the kinds of questions that she was talking about and this young man over here was talking about. The only reason we don't deal with it because we're ignorant of the facts. So we're not going to continue to be ignorant, because we're going to utilize you and your people and your services to help us at DuSable at 4934 South Wabash to have a school that will teach our young people coming from Ariel. We don't want them to go to Whitney Young. We want them to come to the DuSable.
It should have been a dog. Yes,
Give me a phone number, a real phone number.
Well,
I want to get Mr. Rogers a chance, and you ditched my alma mater, so we got to move on. No, after that. No.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. Well, one, Ayanna is a Harris School graduate. She worked at CPS for a dozen years.
I have about 12.
So she is our pro when it comes to education. And
Was on a quest for sainthood, and then
yes, former summer intern at our firm, which we always have a bunch. And so follow-up would be Ayana's role to follow up, because my job is to pick stocks and do research. Melody Hobson does the marketing and client services. Now, she also controls the budget. So she would also tell Ayana and me, I never try to give commercials on Ariel, but she would say, if Melody was here, we can't afford to do more than just the Ariel Community Academy because we're a small business. And, people send all their money to Fidelity and Vanguard and don't think of Ariel Mutual Funds as a part of it. We had a conversation with DePaul University last year. We thought DePaul was going to hire us to manage part of their endowment. They went to a big white firm out east because they said the fee was a little bit different and didn't believe that we could outperform. But if all the anchor institutions make those decisions, it's hard for us and Melody and Ayana and all the other 90 people at Ariel to be able to take on another school or take on another initiative. And, so I usually wouldn't bring that up, but since you sort of led me into it.
Next question, and then we'll take a few more, and then we got it. No, you and then. Okay, cool.
Good afternoon, John.
Good to see you.
My understanding of the John Rogers story is about your father buying you stock at an early age and then making, that making understanding the stock business normal. And so I'm thinking, and trying to create another generation of John Rogers. Is there a way that we could have, that the John Rogers story that it makes it, this applied science, perspective that, you can talk about math all you want. A lot of times when you say math and science, it gets a negative pushback. Whereas here it is, here you are, much like Nike did with Be Like Mike. If we get to Be Like John Rogers, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so this is how you do, as you're on your bus, on your way to school, you're reading about your stock that your father bought you. You're reading about the shoes that you're wearing. You also own stock in that shoe. The burger that you're eating, you also own stock in the burger that you're eating, or wherever. And so to bring that, full circle,
Yeah.
Ariel would be thinking about, putting, something of the John Rogers story like that, so in the schools, so it could be more practical, so they could see it in the third, fourth, fifth grade.
Well, two things on that. Ayana has been working closely with our principal, who's been at Ariel for 21 years, that we have a great curriculum now, and we're willing to share that curriculum with any public school throughout the country. And I'm not sure how much it talks about me. It just talks about
you're in there.
A little bit. So maybe you could beef my part up. I'm okay with that. But then Melody and I have been talking, both of us. We talked about this with our own board meeting last week. That should we be thinking about writing a book? Do we write it together? Melody's been at Ariel now 27 years. She's doing extraordinary work with After School Matters and a myriad of other things. Yeah, so that's something we're talking about. Is that possible? And how do you find the time and get it done right and do it well? And so, thanks for the thought.
We have time for 3 more questions after that. If you guys would like to exchange emails and perhaps reach out that way. But the next 3 questions will be you, then you.
And I don't email, but Ayana does. I've never worked a computer yet.
If you don't mind, I just wanted to offer a rebuttal in reference to violence, because I think you touched based on this before.
Well, if I may, can I just go to a couple new questions, and you guys can do rebuttals and things if you like after that.
I just want to say, first of all, I was out there with Mr. Jackson as he was protesting MacArthur. He does things on such a small scale that have like the most amazing impact. It's because of him that not-for-profit organizations as of today will not have to take out loans to exist, because that is what they were trying to force us to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make it clear that he wasn't even feeling well, and he stood out there and he picketed with a small group of us, and he made that happen. Also, I hear a lot of things being said, but what I don't hear being said is African Americans spend a lot of money. For people who don't have money, we spend a lot of money. We mainly keep these stores open. If we stop spending, they shut down. So as being in the education institution, I would like to see us tell these kids, start to save your money. Kids spend a lot of money. They spend it on gym shoes, clothes, online, wherever. If you can put, it's a commercial that comes on. At the end of the day, I take the change that's in my pocket and I drop it in this jar.
Yes.
If you can start installing in their minds that they have the power, they'll start saving their money. Teach them to save. Put some money to the side, and then that's where the big corporations come in. Can I go into one of these corporations and say, if this child comes to you and he saved up this amount of money, can you do like a 401k for him and match what he has to help him go to college? So there are a lot of ways to do things. I know it's not a question, I've broken it. I just wanted to share that. I don't hear anybody saying, teach the African American communities to save their money.
Very well said. Extremely important. Thank you for saying it. One more question. You yield? Cool. Then that opens it up for you, sir. If you have one more question, we got time for it.
Yes, sir. John, you were talking about the advocacy for youth and with Ariel, and I was just wanted to know, you familiar with the Gray Matter experience? It's an organization by Brittany Robbins. It's a 12-week entrepreneurship exposure program for young people that gets them involved in, learning about business and owning their own business. Yeah. I was wondering if Ariel was doing something like that with the youth regarding owning their own business.
Now, only through the Ariel Community Academy, because we are working there to have kids learn to save more. We work with some organizations like Nifty that help prepare young people for entrepreneurship, and so we've tried at Ariel to partner with other programs that are helping kids get prepared to start their own businesses and build their own businesses. Yeah. And for one, I want to say thank you for wearing the jacket today with our logo, which we really thank you very much for that. We appreciate that. But the only thing I would add to this too, I tell Reverend Jack this all the time. I completely agree. As entrepreneurs, we need access to capital. That's important. But I always say in my closing points, we need access to customers. And I tell people when Cecil Partee, who a lot of you guys are old enough to remember, city treasurer, he made sure the city pension fund gave us $1 million to manage in 1984. They're still one of our largest clients. If he hadn't forced that, we might not have made it through that first 2 and 3 years. And I said earlier, I'm on the board of McDonald's. You guys all know how much wealth has been created by McDonald's franchisees, but also all the suppliers. That you guys know a lot of them. And some of the great leaders of the past, the Shirley McSweens, because McDonald's was agreed to buy sausages from Frank Brooks. Brooks sausages became very, very successful. But McDonald's was that anchor client. Then Frank Brooks could get capital from the banks because he had the big customer. So we need these anchor institutions in our towns, as I said earlier, but I'm reinforcing, have to work with us for our businesses to succeed and thrive when they promise they're going to do it versus these, again, false promises that don't lead to real opportunity.
Can I just add one thing? There's an event called Student Pitch Competition, and it's coming up this Saturday. It's at 965 West Chicago Avenue, and it's young people doing presentations about running their own business.
That's terrific.
It's through the Great Matter Experience Project.
Well, thank you. This is great questions. Thank you so much.
That legacy Cecil started, has Kurt Summers continued it?
He's been fighting too. He has. Kurt gets it. He understands the importance of working with strong minority businesses and pushing the majority companies to be more diverse.
Thank you all for your questions. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.